Welcome. Tonight, we journey back to the quiet mind of a Roman emperor, a man who ruled not with fear, but with thought. You're about to fall asleep. To the story of Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher, a warrior, a witness to time. Let the sound of gentle rain, the hush of distant thunder, and the soft voice of reflection carry you away. No need to follow every word, just drift, let go, and allow his life to become your dream. In the year 121 after Christ, in the heart of a vast and aging empire, a child was born in the city of Rome. He did not cry louder than others. His name was Marcus Annius Verus. The world he entered was rich in marble and blood, filled with echoes of ambition, war, and the whisper of philosophers. The boy, born into a noble family, would grow to become Marcus Aurelius, one of the last and most enduring lights of Stoic wisdom. His family was of patrician stock, woven into the tapestry of Roman politics and commerce. His grandfather had been a senator. His father, also named Marcus Annius Verus, died when the boy was only 3 years old. There are no words left from that man, no long letters or reflections, only the quiet legacy of a name and the shape of a household. Marcus was raised by his mother, Domitia Lucilla. A woman of wealth and dignity, she was not a philosopher, but her silence taught him more than the loudest tutor could. She raised him in a house adorned with scrolls, with Greek statues, and with the steady rhythm of Roman tradition. There were no wild indulgences, no idle celebrations, only discipline and thoughtfulness. The boy absorbed it like cool water on dry stone. From a very young age, Marcus preferred solitude to play. While other children sparred with wooden swords in courtyards, he could often be found lying on the floor of the library, face resting in the folds of an open book. He had a particular love for Epictetus, the once slave turned philosopher, whose words would later become the marrow of his own thinking. The world was already changing. The empire, though strong in appearance, was beginning to creak under the weight of its borders. Wars flared in the north. Plagues wandered from province to province. The poor grew poorer, and yet, in the center of it all, in a villa shaded by olive trees, a child was slowly being shaped by thought, not by war or wealth, but by the silent pull of reason. When he was 6, he began to wear a philosopher's robe, a symbol of the contemplative life. It was uncommon. He was still a child, but he wore it not out of vanity, nor to please those who watched him. He wore it because something in him yearned already for inner stillness, for control, for understanding. His tutors were some of the finest minds Rome could offer. Junius Rusticus, who would later become his most trusted teacher, introduced him to the Stoic way, to endure pain without complaint, to master desire, to treat all men with dignity regardless of their power. These lessons were not taught in lectures, but in glances, pauses, and the spaces between words. As Marcus listened, the boy within him began to dissolve. In its place rose a quiet man, slow to speak, deliberate in movement. His mother saw it before anyone else. She watched him walk through the garden, lips barely moving, whispering truths to himself in Greek. She did not interrupt. She understood. The boy was already beginning to walk the path of a philosopher. But fate was not finished with Marcus. The Emperor Hadrian, old, wise, and ruthless, had noticed the boy. Word of his discipline and silence had reached the imperial court. Hadrian, with no sons of his own, began to craft a succession plan. He adopted a man named Antoninus Pius, under the condition that he, in turn, would adopt Marcus Aurelius. And so it was decided. The quiet child, the one who loved Epictetus more than marble, would one day become emperor. At night, as the rain tapped gently against the windows of the villa, Marcus would lie awake, not with dreams of power, but with questions. How should a man live? What is justice? What does it mean to die well? He did not know yet that these questions would shape the empire, that his journal, written not to the world but to himself, would outlast Rome, that long after marble crumbled, his thoughts would remain like warm breath in a cold room. For now he was just a boy, alone with his mind, listening to rain, wondering, and learning, always learning how to rule not others, but himself. Marcus was still a boy when his path was changed by decree. One day he was a student in the garden. The next, he was heir to the most powerful throne in the world. Hadrian, emperor of Rome, nearing the end of his long reign, had no sons. But he had plans, complex, calculated plans that rippled through the Senate like a cold wind. His decision was not to name Marcus directly, but to adopt Antoninus Pius, an honest, gentle man known for his steady governance, and require him to adopt both Marcus and another young man, Lucius Verus. In that moment, Marcus Aurelius was no longer a distant observer of power. He was its quiet shadow. He was 17. The household changed. There were more tutors now, more expectation, more eyes watching. Yet Marcus did not resist. He did not seek attention, nor indulge in the confidence that such a future might bestow. Instead, he leaned deeper into the Stoics, into Epictetus, Cleanthes, and above all, into the teachings of his new father by law, Antoninus. Antoninus Pius ruled Rome with dignity and restraint. For over 2 decades, his reign was marked by peace. No wars of expansion, no bloody purges, only structure, law, and quiet correction. From him, Marcus learned a lesson not written in books, that greatness could come without spectacle, and that strength need not shout to be felt. Antoninus treated Marcus not as a tool of succession, but as a son. He gave him space to think. He trusted him with matters of the court. He allowed him to make mistakes and to reflect on them. There was no rush, only rhythm. And Marcus, so young, so thoughtful, absorbed everything. He rose early, not for ceremony, but for practice. His mornings began in stillness, his mind rehearsing each day like a soldier sharpens a blade. Today, you will meet arrogance, he would write later. You will meet envy and ignorance and cruelty, but none of them need control you. Remember who you are. He kept journals, though never meant for publication, just notes to himself, quiet reflections, observations of passing emotions, dissections of pain and desire. They were not performances. They were scaffolding, frameworks to hold up the architecture of the soul. Outside, Rome was still bustling. The markets overflowed with olive oil, figs, and linen. The aqueducts hummed with the force of water, carried over distance and time. Senators whispered their ambitions behind draped curtains. And yet, within the mind of one young man, a quieter empire was being built. An empire of thought, of temperance, of endurance. His education was comprehensive: rhetoric, law, philosophy, military training. He learned Greek and Latin so thoroughly that he could write with equal elegance in both. But it was philosophy that held him fast. While others dreamed of glory in the Senate or on the battlefield, Marcus dreamed of control, of his thoughts, his fears, his duties. There is a letter written by his tutor praising Marcus's ability to listen longer than he spoke. He waits, the letter reads, and when he speaks, he seems to speak to himself as much as to others. This was no accident. Marcus had already begun to craft the habits that would carry him through storms few others could endure. And yet, he was still human. There were nights when doubts came, when the future felt like a weight pressing against his chest, when the expectations of an empire sat too heavily on the shoulders of a quiet boy who had once simply loved the sound of rain. In those moments, he would walk the gardens alone, hands behind his back, repeating Stoic maxims beneath his breath like quiet spells. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Antoninus saw the pressure growing in the boy, and so, instead of pushing him toward the throne, he taught him how to wait, how to govern not with impulse, but with patience, how to live not as a ruler in waiting, but as a servant to reason. Years passed. Rome remained at peace. Marcus grew into manhood like a tree bends slowly toward light, deliberate, unshaken. He was married to Faustina, daughter of Antoninus, a political match that blossomed into something warmer than expected. They would have many children, though fate would not spare them sorrow. But that comes later. For now, Marcus Aurelius stood at the edge of youth, looking ahead not at a throne, but at a life of responsibility. And though he never sought it, the empire would soon be his. He would not conquer new lands. He would not carve statues in his own image. He would not delight in flattery or spectacle. Instead, he would try, quietly, stubbornly, to live as a philosopher in a palace, a Stoic in a storm yet to come. The years passed like clouds over the Tiber, softly, silently, with the quiet certainty that nothing remained still. Marcus, now a man in body, though still humble in spirit, lived under the long shadow of Antoninus Pius, whose reign brought peace and stability to an empire grown weary of war. For nearly 2 decades, Marcus served at the emperor's side, not as a figurehead, but as a partner in practice. He attended court sessions, offered counsel on legal matters, and governed provinces in the name of justice. And yet he did not wear a crown. He did not command armies. He was a student of power rather than its wielder. Antoninus had taught him well, not through orders, but through presence. He showed Marcus how to listen, truly listen, when a man spoke not just with his tongue, but with his fear. He showed him how to delay judgment until silence had done its work. He showed him how mercy, when properly applied, was not weakness, but strength that had mastered itself. And Marcus observed. Every day he studied how virtue could live inside bureaucracy, how a ruler could bend not the world but himself to the laws of reason. There were no grand lessons, only repetition, patience, and reflection. He had once written, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And so he practiced. But even philosophers cannot escape the rhythms of family and flesh. Faustina, his wife, bore him many children. Some lived, others did not. The Roman world was still harsh with disease, and even the emperor's future heir could not command the gods to spare his bloodline. The grief did not show on his face in public, but in his journal he whispered to himself, "Do not say more to yourself than the first impressions report. Let nothing be added by the imagination." He had to learn again and again that sorrow is part of the human contract. And yet, there was love. Faustina, though of strong temper, stood beside him. She was no passive wife. She had her critics, her moments of scandal, her impulsive choices. But Marcus, ever steady, rarely judged her in public. He accepted her as the Stoics taught, not as an ideal, but as she was, imperfect, real, loved. He continued his studies even amid state affairs. Late at night, he would read Plato and Epictetus, then write reflections by candlelight while the city slept. He did not seek to sound profound. He wrote only what he needed to hear. Be tolerant with others, he wrote, and strict with yourself. He was not yet emperor, but already the shape of his rule could be seen in the calm of his words. Then, as all things must, the time of Antoninus Pius came to an end. The old emperor, having ruled with grace for 23 years, lay dying. On his last day, he called for Marcus and gave him a simple order: keep the empire as it is. No conquest, no revolutions, just continuity. Marcus wept quietly, not because he feared the task ahead, but because a rare thing was passing from the world, a ruler who had lived with restraint. When Antoninus died, the Senate offered sole power to Marcus Aurelius, but Marcus refused to take it alone. In honor of the emperor's original plan, and in a gesture of humility, he insisted that Lucius Verus, his adoptive brother, share the rule as co-emperor. It was the first time Rome had seen two emperors reign side by side. The decision was not without risk. Lucius was less disciplined, more fond of luxury, and prone to indulgence. But Marcus believed that virtue could be cultivated through shared duty, and so they ruled together, at least in name. The empire, for a moment, breathed in peace, but storms were already gathering. To the east, the Parthian Empire was growing restless. In the north, Germanic tribes tested the borders, and in the far reaches of the Roman provinces, whispers of plague began to drift toward the capital like wind through cracks in the wall. Marcus did not panic. He did not seek omens. He did not curse the heavens. He turned inward. In his journal he wrote, "You have been made by nature for endurance, not for pleasure." The boy who once stood in a garden whispering Stoic truths was now emperor of the known world. And though he wore the purple robe of Caesar, he remained in soul and in posture a student. He did not try to change the world with force. He sought instead to govern the only kingdom a man can truly rule, his mind. The peace that Marcus Aurelius had inherited was delicate, more dream than promise. And dreams, like empires, can dissolve in the wind. Barely had the new co-emperors taken power when the East erupted. The Parthian Empire, Rome's ancient rival beyond the Euphrates, challenged the stability of the eastern provinces. Their king had grown bold. Armies crossed into Roman lands, and the threat was no longer distant. Lucius Verus, the co-emperor Marcus had insisted upon, was assigned to lead the campaign. Though less inclined to discipline, Lucius was charismatic and well-liked by the legions. Marcus trusted him, or perhaps more accurately, he trusted the generals surrounding him. As Lucius departed, Marcus remained in Rome, governing the center while war unfolded at the edges. But something else had begun to spread, invisible and far more dangerous than armies: disease. What we now call the Antonine Plague, likely a form of smallpox, swept across the empire. It came back with the soldiers, it came through the ports, it came with the silence between coughs, and it did not care for emperors or beggars. Thousands died, then tens of thousands. In Rome, funeral pyres burned without pause. Fields were abandoned, temples filled with desperate prayers. And through it all, Marcus remained calm, not cold, not distant, but inwardly anchored. He opened the imperial treasury to fund relief. He sold palace treasures to feed the poor. He made no speeches of vengeance, no declarations of divine punishment. Instead, in his journals, he wrote quietly, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. It is not the actions of others that disturb you, but your own judgments." While others panicked, he reflected. While others cursed the plague, he sought to act with virtue inside it. He did not seek control where there was none. He focused only on what he could guide, his choices. Meanwhile, Lucius returned victorious from the Parthian front. The war had ended in Rome's favor. There were triumphal marches, celebrations, golden coins minted with the faces of the co-emperors. But the plague came too, and Lucius would not survive for long. He died suddenly, some said from a stroke, others from illness. Marcus mourned. Not publicly, not with tears, but with the steady sorrow of a man who had once hoped for harmony and now faced the weight of sole rule. He did not replace Lucius. He did not seize the moment for grandeur. Instead, he turned his eyes northward. Beyond the Danube, Germanic tribes had begun to press harder against Rome's frontier. Driven by hunger, pressure from other migrating peoples, or the smell of a weakened empire, they crossed the river in waves. It was the beginning of what would become known as the Marcomannic Wars, and for the first time, Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, student of reason, lover of books, was forced into the armor of a soldier. He had not been raised for this. He had not sought it. But he did not hesitate. He left Rome. He left the Senate, the baths, the scrolls. He joined his legions near the front, in the forests and rivers of the north. There, among tents and campfires, he slept beside soldiers, ate the same bread, endured the same cold. And at night, by torchlight, he wrote. He did not write of victories or glory. He wrote of patience, of duty, of how to live when life offers no comfort. "It is not death that a man should fear," he wrote, "but never beginning to live." His writings from those years, what we now call the Meditations, were never meant to be published. They were reminders to himself, a kind of moral compass carved in thought. As battles raged, he reminded himself not to hate the enemy, to remain just even to those who sought his death, to lead by example, not decree. He wrote, "When you wake each morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly, but none of them can hurt me." And so he stood, on frozen ground in foreign lands, surrounded by fear, and held fast. Not to certainty, not to comfort, but to principle. The Danube lay cold and swollen, its gray waters reflecting the smoke of Roman camps. Snow fell without sound, and in the forest beyond, the enemy waited, not an empire, but a people. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, and others whose names Rome had long ignored now rose like winter wolves at the border of civilization. Marcus Aurelius stood not in a marble hall, but in mud. His cloak was heavy with frost, his feet numb from months of campaign. He had no delusions of grandeur. He was not Alexander. He had no hunger for conquest. He had only duty. And through that duty, purpose. His generals urged swift retaliation, punishment, decisive force. Marcus instead wrote in his journal, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." He held firm to what few in his place could: compassion under pressure, principle under power. But even compassion must yield to defense. And so the emperor, who once wandered gardens, now led campaigns across the Danubian frontier. Cities were burned, villages fell, Roman forts were overrun, then rebuilt. Every gain came at a cost, measured in lives, not coin. The soldiers, hardened men who respected strength over speech, came to admire him not for his strategy, but for his steadiness. He did not break when others grew bitter. He did not shout. He did not retreat into ceremony. He stood always beside them, just another body beneath the sky. And at night, when the cold deepened and the fires dimmed, he took out his wax tablet and wrote, not about the enemy, not about Rome, but about anger, desire, fear, death. You could leave life right now, he reminded himself. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. He was not afraid to die, but he was afraid to die having failed his own standards. Around him, the empire trembled. The plague still haunted the South. The Senate wavered, rivals whispered, the front lines stretched thin, and still he returned again and again to his one unwavering discipline, philosophy, not as theory, but as armor. He had lost friends in battle, trusted officers, young soldiers who reminded him of his own sons. When he wrote, it was often to console himself for the pain of their absence. The things we love are like leaves on the tree, he wrote. They fall, and the tree still stands. During one winter, as supplies ran low and the enemy grew bolder, he composed what would become the core of the Meditations. He did not write in Latin, the tongue of empire, but in Greek, the language of philosophy. Perhaps because it felt more personal, or because it allowed him, even in hardship, to speak softly to himself. And always, always he returned to the same question: what is within my control? He could not control the war. He could not control the weather. He could not even control how long he would live. But he could control his character, his conduct, his calm. It was here, among frozen tents, dying men, and distant memories of the Palatine Hill, that Marcus Aurelius became something more than a ruler. He became a mirror held up to the possibility of a virtuous life in a world that rewarded cruelty. One story tells of a captured barbarian leader brought before him. Rather than execute him, Marcus offered peace, terms, land, refuge. Some in his court protested, called it weakness. But Marcus replied with a simple phrase: to do harm is to harm oneself. And when the man bent his head in gratitude, Marcus simply nodded and turned away. He knew the war would not end in one gesture, but he also knew that to plant virtue in the soil of conflict was the only true victory a man could claim. He was tired now. Age crept into his bones, his health began to falter, and still he pressed on, not to conquer, but to fulfill the role he had been given. When messengers brought news from Rome of politics, betrayals, fortunes rising and falling, he would only sigh and write, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." And so, in the crucible of war, Marcus Aurelius proved what no scroll or school could teach, that it is not where you are, or what title you hold, or what enemies rise against you, but whether you remain yourself when all else falls away. The philosopher had entered the fire, and in the fire he endured. The years of war had etched deep lines into Marcus's face. He no longer resembled the young man who once paced marble halls with a philosopher's robe. Now he bore the posture of one who had seen too much and spoken too little. His eyes had grown tired, not of the world, but of its repetition. The conflict in the north dragged on. There were victories, yes, but none without cost. Each province secured, each river crossed, brought news of another village burned, another son lost, another letter unopened. Marcus no longer rode into battle. His body, worn by years of cold, illness, and grief, could no longer endure the marches. But he remained in the field, present, composed, never indulgent. His tent was modest, his meals sparse. He refused luxuries even as his body begged for rest. He had watched emperors fall to desire for gold, for pleasure, for legacy. But Marcus had trained himself, day by day, to want less, not more. Receive without pride, he wrote. Let go without attachment. Still, not even Stoicism could spare him sorrow. His wife Faustina had long been at his side, first in youth, then in ceremony, and even at times during the campaigns. Their marriage was not without tension. She was strong-willed, politically active, and occasionally impulsive. Rumors had swirled in Rome about her conduct. Whispers Marcus never addressed. Whether they were true or false, he answered them not with proclamations, but with silence. And when she died, suddenly, far from his tent, he did not protest. He simply closed his eyes. "You are a soul," he wrote to himself, "carrying a corpse." He ordered that she be honored, declared a goddess by Senate decree, as was customary. But inside, there was only stillness. She had borne him children. Some had died young, a few had survived, and one, Commodus, remained. Commodus, his son, was unlike his father in every way. Where Marcus was contemplative, Commodus was impulsive. Where Marcus sought restraint, Commodus sought spectacle. He loved the arena, admired gladiators, and desired not wisdom, but admiration. Marcus saw this. He did not deceive himself. But he also believed in duty above preference, above sentiment. And so he continued to prepare Commodus as successor. Not because he believed the boy would rule well, but because the alternative, civil war, instability, the loss of peace, would be worse. He taught him philosophy, brought him to councils, exposed him to hardship. But Commodus was unmoved. He did not read the Meditations. He did not ask questions of virtue or fate. He sought only the future throne and what pleasures it might afford. In his private writings, Marcus left no complaint. Do not expect Plato's republic, he reminded himself. Still, he grieved in silence, not just for his wife or for Rome or for the future, but for the nature of impermanence itself. He began to reflect more often on death, not with dread, but with curiosity, with acceptance. Death smiles at us all, he wrote. All we can do is smile back. His health declined slowly. Coughs lingered longer. Sleep grew thin. But he did not seek healers, charms, or panicked rituals. He had trained his soul for this, to see death not as a thief, but as a visitor who arrives when the house is ready. And still, in the midst of all this, he worked. He met with generals. He reformed the law. He answered petitions from governors in distant provinces. His days remained full, even as his hours grew few. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when he would sit alone by a river and simply watch the water move. He would say nothing. He would not write. He would only observe. And in those quiet hours, something settled in him, a kind of peace not found in temples or courts, but only in the full acceptance of change. Time is like a river made up of events, he once wrote. No sooner has a thing appeared than it is swept away, and another takes its place. He had seen friends buried, cities collapse, empires tremble, and yet, still, the river moved. Still the wind carried leaves. Still men rose in the morning, believing themselves eternal. He smiled at this, not with mockery, but with understanding. He had once believed that wisdom could change the world. Now he believed it could only change a man, and perhaps that was enough. His words had become simpler, fewer flourishes, more essence. He no longer tried to teach, only to remind. And in that reminder, something luminous remained. He was emperor still, but soon he would be memory. The year was drawing to a close. The wind carried with it the scent of ash and pine, of old fires and distant battles. Marcus Aurelius, now in his late 50s, sat in a quiet chamber near the military front, his body thin, his face marked by the erosion of time, but his eyes still unwavering. He had ruled longer than many expected, longer than he himself had hoped, and though he remained emperor, there was something in him that had already begun to withdraw, not from responsibility, but from the illusion of permanence. His body ached. The cough returned more often now, deeper, dry. His breath was sometimes slow to return after speech. Food no longer held interest. Sleep came in short fragments, but still he wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." The empire remained fragile. The Marcomannic Wars dragged into their final phase. Provinces were restless. The plague, though quieter, still stole lives in the corners of the realm, and in the Senate, new ambitions were rising with each power vacuum. And yet, the greatest question of his reign was no longer in the provinces. It was at home. Commodus. Marcus had tried. He had exposed the boy to philosophy, to hardship, to the rituals of justice and discipline. But Commodus was not shaped by adversity. He recoiled from it. He preferred comfort, applause, blood sport. He fancied himself a gladiator more than a governor. Some in the court urged Marcus to break tradition, to pass the throne to a general, to name a successor not of blood, but of virtue. He considered it quietly, painfully, but he remembered the wars that followed every disputed succession in Roman history, the rivers of blood, the civil collapse, the foreign invasions that always crept in when Rome fought itself. Better a flawed heir than a shattered republic, he may have reasoned. And so, with the weight of that impossible choice, he named Commodus as his sole successor. He did not do it with joy. He did not celebrate. He only recorded in his meditations, "A man's worth is no greater than his ambitions." And Commodus's ambitions were clear. The boy, no longer a boy, grew eager. He postured, dressed in imperial garments, surrounded himself with flatterers. And Marcus watched silently, like a man watching a ship he had built begin to drift toward shallow waters. He did not try to stop it. He only prayed, not to gods, but to reason, that the damage might be slow in its arrival. And so, in his final year, Marcus focused not on what he could not control, but on what still remained in his power. He restructured the treasury, secured grain supplies, appointed competent governors in key provinces, wrote letters to Stoic students across the empire, encouraging them to carry forward the flame of philosophy. But more than anything, he wrote to himself, even when his hand trembled, even when his vision blurred, he wrote not for posterity, not for praise, but because it was how he remembered who he was. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. His meditations, now filling several small notebooks, circled around a single idea: to live in accordance with nature, to be what you are, to accept what comes, to release what passes. He no longer feared death. In fact, he welcomed its nearness, not as a shadow, but as a clarifier, a lens through which all else became visible. He had seen so many pass, emperors, friends, family, and now he prepared to join them, not in dread, but in understanding. What is death? He asked. A cessation of impressions, a return to the source, nothing more. In the camp, soldiers still passed by his tent with quiet reverence. They had seen his simplicity, his endurance, his refusal to be carried in litters or served with extravagance. To them, he was not a god. He was not a king. He was something rarer. He was a man who had never pretended. And as that final year waned, as winter once again approached, Marcus Aurelius remained seated at the edge of his bed, pen in hand, wrapped in a worn cloak, whispering quietly to himself, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." He was preparing to let go, but not before he had finished his last work, not before he had left behind, not laws or monuments, but something more enduring, a map for the soul. The year was drawing to a close. The wind carried with it the scent of ash and pine, of old fires and distant battles. Marcus Aurelius, now in his late 50s, sat in a quiet chamber near the military front, his body thin, his face marked by the erosion of time, but his eyes still unwavering. He had ruled longer than many expected, longer than he himself had hoped. And though he remained emperor, there was something in him that had already begun to withdraw, not from responsibility, but from the illusion of permanence. His body ached. The cough returned more often now, deeper, dry. His breath was sometimes slow to return after speech. Food no longer held interest. Sleep came in short fragments. But still, he wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." The empire remained fragile. The Marcomannic wars dragged into their final phase. Provinces were restless. The plague, though quieter, still stole lives in the corners of the realm, and in the Senate, new ambitions were rising with each power vacuum. And yet, the greatest question of his reign was no longer in the provinces. It was at home. Commodus. Marcus had tried. He had exposed the boy to philosophy, to hardship, to the rituals of justice and discipline. But Commodus was not shaped by adversity. He recoiled from it. He preferred comfort, applause, blood sport. He fancied himself a gladiator more than a governor. Some in the court urged Marcus to break tradition, to pass the throne to a general, to name a successor not of blood, but of virtue. He considered it, quietly, painfully. But he remembered the wars that followed every disputed succession in Roman history. The rivers of blood, the civil collapse, the foreign invasions that always crept in when Rome fought itself. Better a flawed heir than a shattered republic, he may have reasoned. And so, with the weight of that impossible choice, he named Commodus as his sole successor. He did not do it with joy. He did not celebrate. He only recorded in his meditations, "A man's worth is no greater than his ambitions." And Commodus's ambitions were clear. The boy, no longer a boy, grew eager. He postured, dressed in imperial garments, surrounded himself with flatterers. And Marcus watched silently, like a man watching a ship he had built begin to drift toward shallow waters. He did not try to stop it. He only prayed, not to gods, but to reason, that the damage might be slow in its arrival. And so, in his final year, Marcus focused not on what he could not control, but on what still remained in his power. He restructured the treasury, secured grain supplies, appointed competent governors in key provinces, wrote letters to Stoic students across the empire, encouraging them to carry forward the flame of philosophy. The year was 180 after Christ. Winter crept across the empire like an old memory returning. The trees near the Danube had lost their color. The rivers had slowed. Even the soldiers spoke more softly now, as if the frost demanded reverence. Marcus Aurelius lay in a military outpost in Vindobona, what we now call Vienna. The war in the north was nearly won. The tribes were retreating. Treaties had been signed. The long campaign, which had stretched over a decade, was drawing to a quiet close. But Marcus himself was fading. He had known it for some time. His body, once wiry and resilient, was now thin as parchment. His cough, once manageable, had deepened. His breath came in shallow waves. His hands trembled. Even holding the stylus required effort. Yet he still wrote, by candlelight, between fevers, between silences. Soon you will have forgotten everything. Soon everything will have forgotten you. He did not see this as tragedy. For Marcus, it was confirmation. All things are impermanent, even the emperor, even thought, even the memory of thought. Physicians visited, but he dismissed most of them. He refused elaborate treatments, exotic potions, or sacred rites. He did not wish to chase the illusion of healing. He only asked for time, enough to think clearly, enough to write once more. Commodus was near now. He had been summoned by his father weeks earlier. The boy arrived with his entourage dressed in regal purple, armed not with scrolls or maps, but with performance. He paced like an actor, not a general. He smiled too often, too brightly. Marcus watched him quietly from his bed. He said little. He did not scold. He did not warn. He simply observed. Each man lives only the present, he had once written, and that is gone in an instant. The transition was coming, and it could no longer be shaped. Instead, Marcus turned inward. He asked his attendants for solitude. No music, no lectures, no noise. Only the sound of the wind against the canvas of the tent, the crackling of a small fire, and the soft rhythm of his own breath. He dictated a few last orders, not declarati. Marcus Aurelius starved in the winter of 180 A.D., quietly, without spectacle. No last decree, no self-made myth, just breath, and then no breath. Word of his death traveled swiftly across the empire. Messengers galloped through the Alps, across rivers and stone roads, into the heart of Rome. In the Senate, there was silence at first, then mourning. In the provinces, some wept, others feared. For many, Marcus had not been just a ruler, but a symbol of justice, of reason, of calm amidst chaos, and yet power cannot mourn. Within hours the wheels turned. Commodus, his son, assumed the purple robe, now free of restraint. There was no doubt. Marcus had named him successor. The army accepted it. The Senate, weary of conflict, confirmed it. There would be no civil war, no rival claim. On the surface, peace endured. But beneath, the character of Rome began to shift. Commodus was young, vibrant, and adored the theater of empire. Unlike his father, he did not write in journals. He performed, he paraded, he declared. He immediately ended the Marcomannic campaign, leaving treaties unfinished, territories unsecured. He rushed back to Rome, not to govern, but to be seen. He entered the city in golden armor, hailed as the conqueror of the Germans, though it was his father who had fought those wars. Monuments were built, coins were struck, temples dedicated not to Marcus, to Commodus. The Son erased the shadow of the Father with light too bright to last. He renamed the months after himself. He renamed Rome itself. He fought as a gladiator in the arena, performing, blood-soaked, before cheering crowds. For him, empire was not burden, but playground. He ruled not through law, but through whims. The philosopher's legacy began to fray. Many who had served Marcus in silence were dismissed. Stoic advisors vanished from court. Those who remained did so under threat, not trust. The tone of governance shifted from contemplation to consumption. And yet, Marcus had known this was possible. He had foreseen it and accepted it. You may leave this life today, he had written. Let that determine what you do and say. He did not try to prevent history's flow. He did not cling to outcomes. He left behind no grand mausoleum, no final warning to his son. Only pages filled not with commands, but with reflections. And those reflections survived. His meditations, never meant for the public, began to circulate among soldiers, scribes, philosophers. Passed from hand to hand, copied, shared, whispered over in candlelight, not as scripture, but as solace. In them, Marcus still lived not as emperor, but as man, a man who had ruled the world and yet never let it rule him, a man who had witnessed death and yet never feared it, a man who had endured sorrow, loss, failure, and still remained kind. If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, he had written, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed. And so in the courts of the new emperor, where mirrors replaced maps and flattery replaced counsel, a quiet undercurrent flowed. Marcus's words like soft rain on stone. They outlasted statues. They outlasted titles. They would outlast even Rome itself. But in the streets, the shift was clear. The people began to cheer louder. The games grew bloodier. Bread was given freely, thought more rarely. The age of the philosopher had ended, and something else, more theatrical, more fragile, had begun. Marcus Aurelius was gone. His body was returned to Rome, laid to rest in the mausoleum of Hadrian, now the resting place of emperors. There were rituals, sacrifices, a state funeral carried out with imperial precision. But Marcus would not have cared for these gestures. He had long since let go of what others thought of him. What is fame? He had written. A whisper, a shadow, a dream. Rome moved on, eagerly, noisily, blindly. Commodus took center stage. His reign, increasingly erratic, began to crumble into paranoia, violence, and indulgence. The philosopher's quiet legacy was nearly drowned in the roar of the arena, but not completely. Somewhere, perhaps in a soldier's camp trunk or a scholar's drawer, lay a leather-bound bundle of notes, personal reflections, not speeches, not decrees, no audience intended, no names given, just thoughts. They were unpolished, often repetitive, sometimes fragmentary, but they pulsed with clarity, like the last embers of a fire carefully tended, and slowly, across decades and centuries, those embers ignited something larger. At first, they were read by students of Stoicism, curious to see how a Roman emperor had lived its ideals, then by monks who found in his words echoes of patience and virtue, later by generals, leaders, and philosophers. The meditations survived not because they were ordered to, but because they spoke to something deeper than orders. They survived because they were true. Dwell on the beauty of life, Marcus had written. Watch the stars and see yourself running with them. His words spread far beyond the empire he had ruled. When Rome split, his pages remained. When Rome fell, they were copied still. When Europe darkened, they flickered in quiet corners of monasteries and libraries, carried forward like a lamp between storms. In the centuries that followed, rulers came and went. Empires rose and collapsed. But Marcus endured, not as emperor, but as example. He was studied in the Renaissance, praised in the Enlightenment, quoted by presidents, poets, and prisoners. His meditations were read in wars and hospitals, on long nights and longer doubts. You have power over your mind, he had said, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. His legacy was not marble, not conquest, not bloodlines. It was a way of seeing, a reminder that clarity, kindness, and courage are not outcomes. They are choices. Choices we must make each day in silence, without applause, without promise of reward. His book became a companion to those who ruled and those who had nothing, to those who sought meaning and those who faced loss, to those who simply wanted to live well. Marcus never claimed perfection. He struggled with anger, fatigue, frustration, desire. He did not hide this. He confessed it to himself, to his God, to no one. And in that confession, he became human in a way few emperors ever dared. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive. He knew his words would fade, that even the meditations would one day turn to dust. And still, he wrote not to be remembered. He wrote to remember himself. Centuries passed. The aqueducts crumbled. The statues fell. The Senate lost its teeth. What had once been the greatest empire on earth became memory, then myth, then ruin. But something survived. Not the armies, not the wealth, not even the names of most emperors. What remained were words, simple, handwritten thoughts by a man who once held the world in his palm, yet clung to humility with both hands. Marcus Aurelius, forgotten by many as a ruler, began to emerge again as something rarer, a mirror in which every generation could glimpse itself. During the Middle Ages, his words moved quietly through monasteries. Monks, surrounded by silence, found in his writings a kindred stillness. Though not Christian in doctrine, Marcus spoke of duty, of temperance, of the soul's alignment with nature, ideas that echoed across traditions. Look well into yourself, he had written. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if you will always look there. Later, during the Renaissance, he returned more visibly. Thinkers in Florence and Paris, tired of the rigid dogmas of the church and hungry for human wisdom, opened the meditations and found not rules, but reflection, not sermons, but questions. In the Enlightenment, Marcus became a guide once more. Political leaders facing revolution, war, and philosophical doubt read his pages in candlelit studies and war tents. Some, like Frederick the Great, kept his writings near the battlefield. Others, like Thomas Jefferson, quoted him while shaping nations. They found in him not a god-king, but something more useful. A flawed, honest man trying to be good in a corrupt world. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Even in the 20th century, in the trenches of world wars and the silence of prison cells, his voice endured. Viktor Frankl, the psychologist imprisoned in concentration camps, found echoes of Stoic endurance in Marcus. Soldiers and nurses, revolutionaries and refugees, many carried copies of the meditations like a compass that worked when maps failed. Why? Because Marcus did not tell us what to believe. He told us what he struggled to remember. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. This was not denial. It was discipline. He did not teach detachment and coldness. He taught it as compassion for others and for ourselves. He believed pain must be faced, but not obeyed. That injustice must be acknowledged, but not internalized. That death must be accepted, not feared. Death is a release from the impressions of the senses, he wrote, and from desires that make us puppets. And so he endured, not as emperor, not as monument, but as voice. In hospitals and classrooms, in self-help sections and philosophy courses, in whispered late-night thoughts and quiet journal entries, his words return, not to command, to companion, and always they carry the same invitation. Be present, be decent, be calm. Not because someone watches, not because it brings reward, but because it is right. We live in a world Marcus Aurelius could not have imagined, a world of constant noise, endless images, glowing screens, and fractured attention. A world where the voice of the crowd never sleeps, where praise and outrage cycle by the hour, where permanence is a myth and distraction a currency. And yet, his words remain. Scroll through a social feed, and you may see them. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Posted beside fitness routines, journaling challenges, or quiet black and white portraits of a marble bust. His meditations have become hashtags. His voice, once buried in leather-bound manuscripts, now lives in podcasts, TikToks, audiobooks, and minimalist quote graphics. What would Marcus have thought of this? Perhaps he would have smiled, perhaps not. But surely he would have asked, are you using this tool, or is it using you? In a digital age where image often replaces substance, his insistence on inner clarity becomes not just relevant, but revolutionary. He reminds us to pause, to observe our thoughts, to question our desires. The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. People find his voice soothing, not because it is soft, but because it is stable. It does not sell, it does not provoke, it does not perform, it returns. Like breath, like sleep, like the rhythm of waves on a distant shore. In recent years, Marcus Aurelius has found new audiences. Among CEOs and soldiers, therapists and teenagers, monks and minimalists. His writings have been translated into dozens of languages, printed in pocket editions, studied in leadership courses, quoted by YouTubers and Stoic TikTok creators alike. Why now? Because anxiety has become ambient. Because control feels further away than ever. Because the modern world rewards reactivity, and Marcus offers restraint, not coldness, not suppression, but the gentle discipline of asking, is this within my power? And if not, can I let it go? He teaches not to ignore pain, but to frame it, not to fear death, but to place it, not to deny emotion, but to govern it. In a time where authenticity is often confused with impulse, he reminds us self-control is freedom. And yet, he is no saint. He does not claim to have mastered the path, only to have walked it with intention. Do not be overheard complaining, he wrote, not even to yourself. It is advice people still whisper to themselves in moments of weakness, in crowded trains, in waiting rooms, on the edge of sleep. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, now companion in insomnia. His teachings have found their way into therapy rooms and military handbooks, into Stoic journaling apps and quiet nighttime reflections. He has become a still point in the storm of modernity, not because he offers solutions, but because he models stability. He invites us to be unmoved, not indifferent, but anchored, to love only what happens, what was destined, no greater harmony. For Marcus, philosophy was never a performance. It was not a posture to impress others, nor a system to explain the universe. It was a discipline of the self, a way to wake each morning and meet the world with clarity, courage, and control. And that, perhaps, is why he speaks so clearly to people today. He does not demand belief. He does not require temples. He offers no salvation, only responsibility. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. In a culture drowning in options, Marcus teaches focus. In a world driven by comparison, he teaches inner measure. In an age of outrage, he teaches calm endurance. His core idea is deceptively simple. We are responsible for what we think, feel, and do. Everything else is weather. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is not motivational fluff. It is a shift in perspective, a mental aikido that uses the force of difficulty to sharpen the soul. It is what makes Marcus more than a historical curiosity. He becomes a practice. Modern Stoics, those who follow his teachings today, don't wear togas or chant mantras. They journal, they reflect, they pause before reacting. They ask the same questions Marcus did. Is this within my control? What part of this is emotional noise? Am I acting from ego or reason? They do not seek to erase emotion, but to understand its role. You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. For many, Marcus becomes part of their morning ritual, not because he offers answers, but because he strengthens questions. For others, he appears in moments of loss, a breakup, a death, a diagnosis, a disappointment too large to hold all at once. And in those moments, the voice of Marcus returns, not loud, not triumphant, but steady. You could leave life right now. Let that determine how you act, think, and speak. He doesn't mean this as fear. He means it as freedom. The freedom to drop pettiness, to release grudges, to act with dignity even when no one's watching. This is the empire he ruled best, not Rome, but himself. And that empire, the inner empire, is one each of us is born to govern. Few do. Marcus tried, not perfectly, not without failure, but sincerely, with effort, with patience. And that's why he matters. Because in a world obsessed with performance, he was committed to practice. Because in a time of spectacle, he chose silence. Because when he could have ruled through fear, he ruled through principle. And because even at the height of worldly power, he dared to ask, what is it to be a human being? There are no new scrolls to discover, no hidden letters, no secret gospel of Marcus Aurelius buried beneath Rome. What he left behind is complete and disarmingly simple. One book, 12 chapters, written for no one but himself. And yet, it endures, not because it is perfect, but because it is honest. When you wake up in the morning, he wrote, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They're like this because they cannot tell good from evil. This is not pessimism, it's preparation. The morning ritual of someone who wanted to meet life not with surprise, but with equanimity. He did not expect others to be wise, gentle, or fair. He only expected himself to respond with dignity, and that is why his words have become more than historical commentary. They have become companions, inner dialogues we carry into meetings, conflicts, decisions, and quiet moments when we wonder who we are. Marcus reminds us that greatness is not noise, it is restraint. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Today, thousands of people around the world carry meditations in their pockets, on phones, on bookmarks, on bathroom mirrors, in notebooks they write in before sleep, not to memorize, but to return to themselves. And in doing so, they create a kind of continuity, because Marcus never wrote to be remembered. He wrote to remember himself. That is the paradox of his legacy. He let go of legacy, and so he remained. He was not interested in immortality. He knew empires fall, temples burn, names fade. All is ephemeral, he said, fame and the famous as well. And yet, in releasing the need to be remembered, he became unforgettable. In rejecting control, he discovered strength. In accepting death, he discovered how to live. It is this calm clarity, this rootedness in reality, that draws people to him again and again, not for comfort, but for clarity, not for motivation, but for alignment. He offers no false hope, no promises of success, only an invitation to act from reason, to speak from truth, to live from inner stillness. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. This is the empire that never falls, the one within. And Marcus Aurelius, through no intention of his own, has become its architect, not with blueprints, but with presence, with notes, with reminders, with failures he did not hide. He did not tell us how to live. He showed us how to try. And in that effort, made quietly on the edge of battlefields and sleepless nights, he became something rare, not a god, not a saint, but a witness to what it means to live awake. The life of Marcus Aurelius did not end in triumph, nor in tragedy. It ended as he lived quietly, deliberately, without pretense. There was no monument greater than his example, no inheritance richer than his words. When he died, the empire did not collapse. The stars did not shift. The Senate moved forward. Commodus took the throne. Rome turned as Rome always did. But in small places, in the minds of those who sought not to rule the world, but to rule themselves, a door remained open. A door to a different kind of empire, an inner empire, one made not of stone or soldiers, but of character. That was the true ground Marcus Aurelius cultivated, not battlefields, but habits, not provinces, but principles, not territory, but thought. A man's worth, he had written, is measured by the worth of what he values. And so we ask ourselves, what do we value? Attention or awareness, power or purpose, noise or stillness? In a world that often teaches us to reach outward, Marcus taught us to return inward, to return not in retreat, but in recognition of what we can control, of what we can become. And so he leaves us, not as emperor, not as relic, but as question. What would it mean to live with such quiet discipline? To begin each day with clarity? To meet each moment not with control, but with consent to what is? Marcus does not offer comfort in the modern sense. He does not promise success or happiness or admiration. He offers something subtler, something deeper, integrity, not as a badge, but as a daily practice, moment by moment, word by word, breath by breath. He knew how brief life was, how easily it could be wasted in complaint, in vanity, in fear, and so he used it, not to build his name, but to build his nature. Don't live as if you had 1,000 years. These were not just words he wrote. They were reminders, lighthouses to himself in the fog, and now, perhaps, to us. He is gone. The world he knew is gone, but the discipline remains. And when we walk through noise, when we are tested by anger, loss, uncertainty, Marcus walks with us, not ahead, not behind, but beside, a witness, a whisper, a weightless guide saying, live with reason, act with purpose, die with peace. And so ends the life of Marcus Aurelius. But the echo is just beginning. And now, let the thoughts fade. Let the images settle. Let the weight of the world slide quietly from your shoulders. You've walked through the life of a man who ruled an empire and chose every day to rule only himself. You've listened to his questions, his losses, his patience, his silence, and now there is nothing more to hear, nothing more to understand, only stillness. Let the words dissolve into breath. Let the breath dissolve into calm. Let calm dissolve into sleep. There is no empire to hold tonight, no judgment to pass, no task to complete. Only the gentle rhythm of rest and the quiet echo of a voice that once said, look within. The fountain of good is ever flowing. Good night, traveler. You are safe. You are still. You are here. And that is enough.